Good morning. Good, whatever time of day it is that some of you may be watching this service after Sunday morning. And I'll say good morning to you wherever you are and whenever it is. Good morning and welcome to worship at the Old Ship Meeting House, place of worship for First Parish in Hingham, Unitarian Universalist. Good morning and welcome. We begin as we do each week with a bell and then music. The prelude this morning will be offered by Rich Jensen.
I see trees of green, red roses too. I see them bloom for me and you, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. I see skies of blue and clouds of white, the bright blessed days and the dark sacred nights, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. The colors of the rainbow, so pretty in the sky, are all on the faces of the people going by. I see friends shaking hands, saying, how do you do? They're really saying, I love you. I hear babies cry, and I watch them grow. They'll learn much more than I'll ever know. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world.
Oh, that is a beautiful way to begin. Thank you, Rich. Thank you so much. Here in this meeting house called Old Ship, here on this hillside in a town we call Hingham, Massachusetts, land with which the Massachusetts and Wampanoag people on which they used to live. Here in this nation we call the United States of America, here on our blue-green planet Earth, here we gather for worship, gather to hold before ourselves our highest of ideals, and to seek within and among us strength, solace, and inspiration. Here, this day, we gather for worship, and it is good. Our introit comes from our music director, Christopher Nicholson, man from UI Receive. Christopher. Christopher, and from Christopher we go to Chris Sullivan, who will light our chalice this morning. Chris is a member of our Board of Trustees and a longtime member of our congregation. Chris.
Thank you. The reading I've found is from Wayne B. Arneson, It reads, "Take courage, friends. The way is often hard. The path is never clear. And the stakes are very high. Yet take courage. For deep down there is another truth. You are not alone."
Thank you, Chris. With those good words, I light the chalice, the flaming chalice of our faith. I'm going to invite you to join me in singing. Of course, you're going to stay muted, but I hope you'll sing along. This is something we've sung before. It is God's Counting on Me, God's Counting on You. A lot of repetition. You will get it if you don't think you know it now. The chorus, hoping we'll all pull through, hoping we'll all pull through, hoping we'll all pull through, you and me. When we look and we see things that should not be, God's counting on me, God's counting on you. When we look and we see things that should not be, God's counting on me, God's counting on you. Hoping we'll all pull through, hoping we'll all pull through, hoping we'll all pull through, me and you. It's time to turn things around, trickle up, not trickle down. God's counting on me, God's counting on you. It's time to turn things around, trickle up, not trickle down. God's counting on me, God's counting on you. Hoping we'll all pull through, 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 me and you. Don't give up, don't give in, working together we all can win. God's counting on me, God's counting on you. Don't give up, don't give in, working together we all can win. God's counting on me, God's counting on you. Hoping we'll all pull through, hoping we'll all pull through, hoping we'll all pull through, me and you. There's big problems to be solved. Let's get everyone involved. God's counting on me, God's counting on you. There's big problems to be solved. Let's get everyone involved. God's counting on me, God's counting on you. What we do now, you and me, will affect eternity. God's counting on me, God's counting on you. What we do now, you and me, will affect eternity. God's counting on me, God's counting on you. Last time, hoping we'll all pull through, hoping we'll all pull through, hoping we'll all pull through, me and you. Hoping we'll all pull through, me and you. I think I heard you singing. Announcements. There are several. First, welcome again. Welcome not only here to worship, but for our coffee hour immediately following. The same Zoom link. Just hang on, stay on if you'd like to join in some additional conversation with a few breakout rooms for smaller groups. Will be a little shorter coffee hour today, because afterwards we will have a forum led by our Social Justice Council to consider our focus, our social justice, social outreach focus here at Old Ship for the months and next year or two to come. So we hope you'll stay for that as well, or if you need to leave for a while and return, that forum will begin at 11:45, the same Zoom link. Two announcements about cancellations and postponements, I'm sorry to say. For now, there will be no further, for the moment, Tuesday conversations with the minister. And then I am postponing my Emerson class. It was to be 2 sessions for the next 2 Wednesdays. And we are going to do that, but we'll do it in the spring. And maybe we'll tack on a little Thoreau and Whitman as well. So keep your eye on that. Next Sunday, one final announcement, is our annual service of remembrance. During the service, many of you know how it works, though at Zoom it will be a little different. During the service, we'll have the opportunity to name on chat loved ones who've died, and also, if we're on video, to lift up a photograph or a memento from someone who is dear to us, who has passed from among us. So next Sunday, our service of remembrance. Pleased for our Time for All Ages to introduce Chloe Brede, our interim director of religious education. Chloe, thank you.
Hi, everyone. I hope you all are having a good morning. I wanted to tell you a little bit, well, I'll start this way. So during the pandemic, I did a little project, and I did this project where I sent postcards to my family and friends. I think I sent probably something like, I want to say maybe, maybe almost 50 postcards to people. And I did this because postcards were a really safe way to send somebody a note, or to tell them that I was thinking about them, or to share other thoughts with them. And one of the boxes of postcards that I got had 50 different women who were from the history of science. So women who had done really cool things as scientists over the ages. And one of the people that I discovered as I was writing these postcards is the one that I have here in front of you, Marjory Stoneman Douglas. And so for adults, this name might sound sort of familiar. That name was in the news in the last sort of in recent years. But I wanted to tell you less about her name and more about the woman herself, because I think I knew her name, but I never really knew why she was famous. So you can see a little bit of the postcard. So this was the front of the postcard, and I really liked the quote at the bottom. I'd like to hear less talk about men and women and more talk about citizens. So she was very much sort of like wanting everybody's voice to be heard as an advocate. Marjorie was born before women had the right to vote. And she grew up here actually in Massachusetts, in Taunton, and got straight A's at a local women's college. So she was really smart. Marjorie got married, but quickly learned that her husband was a con man. So he wasn't a nice person, and he liked to lie a lot. Can you imagine that finding out maybe I think it was even less than a year into her relationship, she found that out. So she left her husband and her family here in Massachusetts, and she moved to Florida to be with her father's family who lived there. And Marjorie went to work for her father, who owned a newspaper, and it was the newspaper that actually became later the Miami Herald. So she went to work for a really famous newspaper, and she was a really amazing writer. She started as a social columnist, so she wrote about fashion and high society and everything that was happening in Miami, the latest parties in town. But as she grew older, she became more and more interested in women's rights and the environment and other stuff. I think they also just started to actually give her the opportunity to write about more interesting things too. When she was almost 60, she published her most famous book. She had been asked to write a book about the Miami River, but in looking at the Miami River, she said, you know what, this river is way too small. It's a very small river. And she said, you know what would be more interesting is if I could write about the Florida Everglades instead. The Everglades are this huge swamp or wetland in Florida. So it's this place where water sits and you can't really walk on it so well, but there's trees and plants growing, and there's things like alligators and fish. But so here's a picture of her with her most famous book. You can see it open on her lap and holding her cat. So she must have been probably in her 60s, at least at this point, maybe older. And then this is a picture of the Everglades here. And we even have a picture of an alligator and some birds. So you can see what sorts of things you might see in the Everglades. And so she did a lot of research and wrote about why people should preserve or save the Everglades rather than destroy them. And her book sold out. It got really famous, and people still read it today. And this was in like the 1950s or so that she published her book. When she was 79 years old, so take note of this, everybody, she founded an organization called Friends of the Everglades to help advocate for them. And that organization is still around today. So Marjorie lived until she was 108, and it seems like she did a lot of her work that sort of is still around today when she was over 60, in her 70s, 80s, 90s. So it says no matter how old you are, you can really make a difference. And when she was even 103, she visited the White House. And Hillary Clinton said that she might have been the oldest person to ever stay in the White House overnight. So she slept in one of the rooms there and stayed overnight and got to hang out with the president and the first lady and everybody. So here's a picture of her with Bill Clinton, and you can see her talking there and him smiling. It's pretty cool. So she was a passionate woman with ties to Massachusetts, who helped shape sort of how we care for the environment, especially in Florida and the national park that's there now. That all has Marjorie's imprint on it. So I hope when you hear her name, you can think of her legacy too, and everything that she's done for the environment and climate change, and just sort of making a huge difference, especially in her older years. She did great things. So thank you.
Thank you, Chloe. Thanks so much. We come to our time of joys, sorrows, and concerns. I have not heard from anyone via email about something you'd like shared. I do invite you, if you like, to put into chat a joy or a sorrow or a deep concern, as I light all the flames of our chalice and the flames surrounding it to hold together, all hold one another and hold our joys, sorrows, and concerns, even though they have remained unspoken. May we enter a time of meditation, prayer, and silence. Blessed silence in the midst of these times, noisy with news, with information, with misinformation. Blessed silence in these otherwise too noisy times. Silence within which simply to be present, to touch and be touched by well springs of kindness. Silence within which compassion might arise from the basic goodness of our hearts. Compassion for those who suffer, for those facing challenges, whatever they may be. Compassion for those with whom we differ. Silence, blessed silence, from which prayers may arise. Prayers for one another in the midst of our congregation and this gathering. Prayers for our communities, for our nation, Prayers for the family of humanity and the family of life. Prayers for our earth home. As we enter a time of silence, may it be renewing silence. Our anthem this morning will be shared by our soprano soloist, Heather Nolasco, singing Shenandoah. Heather.
Oh, Shenandoah, I long to hear you. Away, your rolling river. Oh, Shenandoah, I long to hear you. Away, I'm bound away across the wide Missouri. Oh, Shenandoah, I'm bound to leave you. Away, your rolling river. Oh, Shenandoah, I'll not deceive you. Away, I'm bound away across the wide Missouri.
We move to Roy Harris for our first reading. Roy. I didn't give you much warning, but it's your turn.
we go. The first reading is from The Enlightened Mind by the Brooklyn-born writer and scholar Stephen Mitchell. This passage is his summary of the ancient Buddhist metaphor for the interwoven oneness of existence, the net of Indra. The net of Indra is a profound and subtle metaphor for the structure of reality. Imagine a vast net. At each crossing point, there is a jewel. Each jewel is perfectly clear and reflects all the other jewels in the net. The way two mirrors placed opposite each other will reflect an image ad infinitum. The jewel is the metaphor, in this metaphor, stands for an individual being or an individual consciousness or a cell or an atom. Every jewel is intimately connected with all other jewels in the universe, and a change in one jewel means a change, however slight, in every other jewel. Here ends the first reading.
Thank you. And we move to Diane Morrison for the second reading.
Good morning. The second reading is from essays by Paul Harkin in his book called Drawdown, the most comprehensive plan ever to reverse global warming. We see global warming not as an inevitability, but as an invitation to build, innovate, affect change, a pathway that awakens creativity, compassion, and genius. This is not a liberal agenda, nor is it a conservative one. This is the human agenda. Climate solutions depend on community, collaboration, and cooperation. Concern for the well-being of others is bred in the bone, endemic and hardwired. We became human beings by working together and helping one another. What it takes to reverse global warming is one person after another remembering who we truly are. Here ends the second reading.
Thank you, Diane. Our offering, we cannot literally pass the plate, but we share on the Old Ship website or by sending a check. This marks one of our outreach offerings today, and anytime in weeks to come, you can make your gift to the Hingham Food Pantry, again, through our website. You can make the gift or by sending a check to Old Ship, and we'll pass it right along to the Hingham Food Pantry. Today, Ellie Killam from the Hingham Food Pantry has a few words to say to tell us about the food pantry and in particular how they're managing during these days. Ellie, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Ken. I'm a volunteer at the Hingham Food Pantry, and I've volunteered there now for about 24 years. And as you may know, the food pantry opened in 1991, and we're currently housed in the basement of the Second Parish Church on Main Street. The pantry is open for food distribution twice a month, and food is delivered by one team of volunteers to the homes of those not capable of coming in. And food is also distributed by yet another group to families who drive themselves to the food pantry. We provide a 6-day supply of food in a 2-week period. And as such, we provide fresh fruits and vegetables, fresh bread, milk, yogurt, and eggs, frozen meats and fish, and a variety of canned goods and other foodstuffs. In addition, we provide paper goods, dish and clothes detergents, and bar soap. The food comes to us through the Greater Boston Food Bank by donation from individuals and community groups, local food stores, and food drives, and by direct food purchase. All the food is picked up, sorted, stored, packed, and delivered by a whole cadre of volunteers. It does truly take a village. We are fortunate to be able to purchase gluten-free foods and foodstuffs for those on special diets. As well, we endeavor to be a reliable source of support to our families, not only with food, but also by referring them to other social service agencies and community support groups. And at holiday times, we work hard to distribute special holiday meals to our families. Now, since March and the beginning of the pandemic, we've adopted a drive-through means of distributing food at Second Parish. We have seen a 20% increase in families served, although this has leveled out somewhat in recent weeks. We are currently serving about 125 families per month. The Greater Boston Food Bank and other food pantries expect an increase in the next few months in the numbers of families to be served, and this, of course, will present new challenges. Accessing food at the Greater Boston Food Bank is more difficult now, and that with the increased demand for food, appointments are very limited. Food and sundry costs are going up too, as you may well be aware, with this increased demand. Your contributions help provide healthy, balanced meals to our families. We are very grateful to you for your past contributions through food drives, Super Bowls, financial support, as well as for your volunteer efforts. We truly appreciate any support you might give us, and thank you for inviting us to speak with you today.
Thank you, Ellie. And in advance, thanks to everyone for giving as generously as possible for this more important purpose than ever. Thank you, Ellie. Our offertory anthem is from Katie Weintraub, our alto soloist, We Would Be One.
We would be one, as now we join in singing our hymn of love, to pledge ourselves anew to that high cause of greater understanding of who we are and what in us is true. We would be one in living for each other, to show to all a new community. We would be one in building for tomorrow a nobler world than we have known today. We would be one in searching for that meaning which finds our hearts and points us on our way. As one we pledge ourselves to greater service, with love and justice strive to make us free.
Thank you, Katie. We would be one indeed. This is our hope. My message today I've titled The Human Agenda. Let me start with a personal story. During my college years, I was a camp counselor for most of the summers of those years at a camp in the Adirondack Mountains. I could still sing you the camp song, but I won't, not this morning anyway. If you're curious, just ask. In any case, early one morning during one of those summers, I awoke earlier than the boys, and left the dozen or so 9-year-olds in the charge of my co-counselor and went for a short hike up the side of what we called Vampire Mountain. I'm sure that wasn't the official name. Went up just far enough, it wasn't too far, probably less than a half a mile. Went up just far enough to a clearing where there was a rock, and I sat on the rock and was able to look back at camp and see the fields, playing fields spread before me, and a blue sky that morning, and hills camp surrounded by woods and the hills stretching out to the distance. So I sat. And as I sat, it occurred to me that no matter how far I hiked, no matter how many miles into the mountains, uncharted territory even, I would never be completely apart from others, never truly alone, even though I felt I was alone on the side of that mountain. And however apparently self-sufficient I might imagine becoming, apart from everyone, and independent living and so on, I could never be entirely self-sufficient. I would always, to one degree or another, be dependent on other human beings, on the life systems upon which we all depend. Now, it's not that I wanted to separate myself completely from others or to become entirely self-sufficient, even if that was possible. Rather, it was just that as I sat there, contemplating my being a little bit apart from camp and the other counselors and the campers, that awareness came to me. Not so much a mystical experience of oneness, but rather logical understanding of our human interdependence, one with another. And of course, as I say, with the rest of the world, animal, vegetable, mineral. And it was reassuring to be reminded of that I was not and never could be entirely separate. As you can hear, that summer morning's epiphany in the mountains has stayed with me all these decades since. The image of the woods, hills, camp, and sky are just about as vividly in my mind's eye now as if it were the day after I had hiked up the mountain. Maybe it was a sort of mystical experience. I don't know. In any case, I treasure that memory. We heard Paul Hawken's words earlier. He said, what it takes to reverse global warming is one person after another remembering who we truly are. Who we truly are. Well, that morning, sitting on a rock on the side of a very modest mountain in the Adirondacks, I knew one thing anyway. Who we truly are, part of who we are, is to begin with, is not utterly separate human beings, but intimately interwoven with one another and with all life. You hear me preach this all the time. Here he goes again. And the net of Indra, this profound and subtle metaphor for the structure of reality, as Stephen Mitchell described it in the first reading, is of course a poetic expression of the same idea, the same thing. Similarly, Paul's affirmation in one of his letters to the Corinthians that we, each and all of us, are part of one body of Christ. Each of us with our unique gifts, our unique roles to play in the world, unique things we can offer the world and one another, and at the same time, part of one interwoven whole, as he put it, one body, who we truly are. Now, equally important, it seems to me, is to name that another dimension of who we are, human beings, is that we human beings have evolved not to be primarily mean, brutish, hateful, cruel, though we have that capability, as all too apparent sometimes, all too easy to evoke sometimes. Rather, we evolved and survived as a species because of our ability to cooperate and get along. We heard that in the reading, to help one another. In a recent book titled Humankind, A Hopeful History, the young historian Rutger Bregman, he's Dutch, writes that science seems to suggest that human beings, that the human story is mostly a story of survival of the friendliest. Survival of the friendliest. Doesn't always look that way, but think about it. Think about it. How do we survive other than by cooperating, by being friendly most of the time with one another? There's a very different notion, as he points out, from the idea that under the veneer of civilization, just this veneer, is this brutish world, this so-called Hobbesian war of all against all, everyone out, always and only really out for themselves, however they might pretend to the contrary. But to use Paul Hawken's formulation again, it's much more likely that concern for the well-being of others is bred in our bones. We became human beings, he said, by working together and helping one another. We became human. Of course, there is evidence to the contrary in too many ways, too visible these days, as I've suggested, as we see. But in fact, there is, even these days, more evidence, it seems to me, when you walk around every day, you think of not just what's on the evening news, but what's really going on in the world, people helping each other out, people cooperating, whether in families, communities, business, and so on. All this supports the notion that we are basically a friendly species, predisposed unless conditioned or provoked otherwise, to the contrary, to be helpful, kind, and compassionate. In any case, as Bregman writes in Humankind, if we choose to behave as if this more hopeful analysis is true, well then, kindness begets kindness. We see that. Compassion begets compassion. Helping hands inspire more helping hands. We see this, we know it. So it's hopeful stuff. Hopeful, even so, these days and any time, there are moments, more than moments sometimes, when we might despair over the state of the world, climate change, racism, and all the rest. We can make the list. Yet we can name this despair, this feeling that we're having, allow ourselves to feel it, and then at the same time choose not to let it overwhelm us or immobilize us. And if we see that a friend or neighbor is in the grip of despair, well, we can be present for our neighbor, for our friend, offering a helping hand together, perhaps lift up some reasons not to despair. In a way, that's what a number of us have been doing over these past several weeks as we explored the book that the second reading came from, Drawdown, the most comprehensive plan ever proposed to reverse global warming. It's an extraordinary book. It was published in 2016, but it's been since updated in a variety of ways on the Drawdown website. The huge research team that put it together, Paul Hawken was an editor, but huge team of scientists and others put it together. They named something like 100 solutions, if you will, to climate change. And if you thought that emissions from cars and power plants, that was all it was about, the cause and potential solutions through reducing those emissions, think again. The book offers us insights into an amazingly rich variety of efforts to slow global warming and avert the worst effects of climate change, from how we grow our food, agricultural practices and land use, from building materials, how we build things, education, how we educate our children. Of course, looking at ways to eliminate or reduce emissions from transportation and electricity and so on. But there's so much more, so much more. And these are all efforts that are going on now, not pie in the sky. They do offer some looks into the possible future, but mostly it's about things that are going on now that people are doing, from scientists at MIT to farmers in Africa and Asia and everywhere else, politicians and teachers, builders and designers, things that are going on now. And if all this positive stuff begins to sound too big, even overwhelming in its own way, there are, of course, things that individuals can do as part of those 100 solutions. And I know that most, if not all of you, are doing some or many of these things each day, committed to changing your lives as well as changing light bulbs. For we really do make a difference through our individual changes, the individual ways we live. This said, as climate activist Bill McKibben, founder of 350.org, quoted in Drawdown, has put it, we also make a difference by becoming part of a movement. And that too sounds big, but sometimes it's just as simple as talking to your neighbor, talking to your friend, talking to a family member. It can be more than that. There are ways to volunteer. Here in Hingham, we've got 350.org, the South Shore node, meets, well, virtually now, but right headquartered here at Old Ship. There's Hingham Net Zero, and there'll be a word about a special event this Tuesday that we'll let you know about in the weekly update that Hingham Net Zero is sponsoring. Each small thing we do, each neighbor we speak to adds up to a movement. All of which is, as we heard from Paul Hawken, not part of a conservative agenda or a liberal agenda, but the human agenda, or as I would extend it, the agenda for life. and its agenda, an agenda which will serve to meet the challenge of climate change in the spirit of climate justice. True climate justice includes our efforts in the movement for racial justice and economic equity and justice as well. So isn't this the team, if you will, that we'd like to be on for the long haul? The human team, the life team? I think so. The team that seeks to feel kinship, and kinship not only with our sort of folks, natural enough to feel kinship with our own kind, whether these days Democrat or Republican, Christian or Jewish, Muslim or Buddhist, citizen or new arrival, black or white, young or old, and so on. Natural enough to enjoy being with those who are something like us, but also to be on this human team is to feel kinship with all of life, all of the human family, and then to get on with serving life. Well, it was about 50 summers ago that I sat on that rock on the side of a very modest mountain with a view of land and woods and sky, the hills stretching out before me, and had that little epiphany. That moment and that view stays with me, as I've said, as you've heard. Stays with me, and perhaps now it's in your mind, but I invite you to envision your own landscape or seascape, maybe looking outside your window right now, or some memory. Envision that stretching before you, imagining all the creatures, not only other people, but creatures of land and sea, occupying the land or the sea, living their lives, and imagining the blue-green earth that we share. One family, one team, our team. Amen. Blessed be. I will extinguish the flame of our faith, our Unitarian Universalist faith, and I will extinguish the flames surrounding it, flames lit with love, flames lit with our values and principles in mind and heart. But I cannot extinguish the love, the principles, the values. We take those with us in our hearts, in our minds, in our lives, wherever we go. I want to invite you to join me in singing again. This too is something we have sung in our congregation. And it's simple. There's a lot of repetition, just like the first one. The Tide is Rising, written by Rabbi Shoshana and her husband, Yotam Shackler, on the occasion of the People's Climate March a number of years ago. The tide is rising, and so are we. This is where we are called to be. This is where we are called to be. The tide is rising, and so are we. The tide is rising, and so are we. The tide is rising, and so are we. This is where we are called to be. This is where we are called to be. The task is mighty, and so are we. The task is mighty, and so are we. The task is mighty, and so are we. This is where we are called to be. This is where we are called to be. The land is holy, and so are we. The land is holy, and so are we. The land is holy, and so are we. This is where we are called to be. This is where we are called to be. The sun is shining, and so are we. The sun is shining, and so are we. The sun is shining, and so are we. This is where we are called to be. This is where we are called to be. The world is ready, and so are we. The world is ready, and so are we. The world is ready, and so are we. This is where we are called to be. This is where we are called to be. The tide is rising, and so are we. May we rise and continue to rise to care for one another, to care for all beings, to care for our earth home. May we rise and rise again and continue on our journey of love and hope. Blessed be. Amen. Our choral benediction and postlude will be shared by Christopher. Christopher.
Ancient Mother, I hear you calling. Ancient Mother, I hear your song. Ancient Mother, I feel your laughter. Ancient Mother, I taste your tears. Go now in peace, go now in peace. May the love of God surround you everywhere, everywhere you may go.
Thank you, Christopher. Thank you, everyone. Go now in peace.